Coming up on this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast.
I got laid off 3 times in the space of 9 months from talent acquisition roles, which was essentially the reason why I launched my own consulting business. Your content is the best way to differentiate yourself from your market because it's a way to nurture passive leads. It's a way to build credibility. If a guy like me who's introverted and, is quite dry and quite sarcastic, if I can post content that makes people laugh and that interests people, then I'm sure you can.
Welcome to the Elite Recruiter Podcast with your host, Benjamin Mena, where we focus on what it takes to win in the recruiting game. We cover it all from sales, marketing, mindset, money, leadership, and placements.
I'm excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast because this is something that I am always telling people to do. If you're just starting your firm or you've just gotten laid off as an internal recruiter, this can be the absolute biggest game changer on getting yourself set up financially. It can also be the gateway into doing something else. And I'll be honest, this was actually the gateway that happened to me when we launched our own firm. So here's the thing. You need to figure out how to set yourself up properly. And you need to figure out how to get money into your business, into your family, so that way you can definitely take care of bills, take care of everything. A foundation is the proper way to start your business. And that's why I'm so excited to bring Liam on here to talk about what the hell is actually fractional. We're seeing it everywhere. I see it on LinkedIn. I see it everywhere. What the hell is it? How do you set yourself up with it? And how do you position yourself to be a fractional recruiter so that way you can start building a foundation and figure out where you want to go next? So Liam, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you.
All right. Before we get started, a quick 30 seconds. Tell us about yourself.
Cool. Yeah, no. So first of all, thank you for having me on. Big fan. So it's great to be on. And yeah, quick introduction. So based in the UK, Northeast, sunny Newcastle, where the weather is always rainy and grey. I've been in recruitment since 2014. So did sort of 7 years agency before moving internal and then set up my own fractional consulting business towards the end of 2023. A big sports fan, bit of a tech nerd as well. So yeah, really keen to jump into all things recruitment tech and fractional.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, the question is, we always get started. How did you end up in this wonderful world of recruiting?
To be honest, randomly. So I didn't grow up wanting to be a recruiter. Actually, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So originally I wanted to be an astronaut. That didn't happen. So I decided to be a lawyer. So I did law at university. I've actually got a master's in law and then spent about a year working as a paralegal for a couple of firms in the UK. But then basically a friend of mine at the time, and bearing in mind, this is sort of early 20s, I had no money basically. And a friend of mine, he seemed to have loads of money. And it turned out he worked in recruitment. He was, quite a successful biller. And he basically had loads of cash. I was jealous. And he said to me, you should get into recruitment. It's awesome. You can make loads of money. It's really cool. You work with loads of clients, etc. And yeah, I applied for a few recruitment jobs. I wasn't making a lot of money as a paralegal. I was just basically, grabbing Starbucks for partners and spending hours and hours in a library researching cases, which wasn't the most exciting time. So yeah, sent off a bunch of applications for recruitment jobs and landed a trainee recruitment consultant role with a big agency.
Okay, so you started off, you went to law school.
I did, yeah, basically.
Let me just ask you this. You got your law degree, you climbed that ladder. Do you guys have student debt over there? Student loan debt?
Yeah, student loans, student finance.
You look at this path and you're like, do I want to give up this path for something different? How did you figure that out?
It's one of those things, really. I think at the time, quite honestly, it was very much a financially driven decision. So, when you go into a law firm entry level, I know quite a lot of recruiters actually weirdly, came from a legal background. I've got quite a few friends who did that. You don't make much money when you're entry level. You kind of on a pretty bad salary, but you are working long hours. And I think at the time, genuinely, I wasn't really enjoying it. And it genuinely was just a purely financially driven decision. I wanted to earn more, and recruitment just seemed like an interesting career path. I'm a bit of a tech nerd anyway, so the thought of working for an IT recruitment company, helping tech professionals, working with tech companies seemed quite cool. And yeah, it was just a bit of a spur of the moment thing, really. I just thought, screw it, why not give it a try? And yeah, here I am.
I think that's almost everybody's story. I'll give it a try. I'll find something else down the road. And little do you know that You've now set your career path.
That's what I mean. It was a random one. I think, again, I haven't actually met a recruiter in my entire career who actually, decided when they were a kid, I want to be a recruiter. Yeah. I'm yet to meet anyone. I think everybody seems to accidentally end up in the industry, which I think kind of makes it quite a funny industry in general, really. You kind of end up there, but you can make a lot out of it, basically. It's a good career path.
It's the land of the misfit toys.
100%, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about your agency days. Like, you spent 7 years there.
Yeah.
Like, was it all at one firm?
It was, yeah. So I worked for a pretty big firm, and it was good. I mean, to be honest, a lot of recruiters sort of look back on their early agency days and criticize it. I can't complain. Yeah, it was good. You were thrown in the deep end, so it was very much like cold calling. High volume of dials every single day, trying to convert business. I was given quite a cold desk, so I didn't have any clients really. So I had to essentially win my own business, which is good. And it taught me a lot about resilience. I think getting told to get lost 100 times in a row. So yeah, I think the agency days were interesting. It was a good experience. And I think, to be honest, my, I guess, confidence now in sort of doing business development sales, it came from that agency tenure, because it's sink or swim. Yeah. If you don't pull jobs and win business, you're out of a job. So yeah.
Wait, so they literally dropped you in, taught you how to be a recruiter, but you had to do a full 360 desk there?
Yeah. Back then, literally, yeah. So we didn't really have a massive amount of kind of warm clients. It was very much cold calling 360 for anybody who joined as a trainee. I think you were just given a phone. Yeah. This was kind of before the whole like 180 delivery team thing, which sort of came around a few years later. At the time, everybody was 360. So you literally, here's a phone, like you need to get on the phone and find a client. If you don't do that, then the pressure's on. And I mean, to be honest, at the time, it was awful because I didn't have any experience in sales. I didn't come from like a telesales background. Like when I was at university, I worked behind the bar. So I was selling drinks, but selling a drink to someone who's intoxicated is actually pretty easy. But yeah, it was tough. It was a pretty pretty tough way to start. But yeah, genuinely, I enjoyed it. It was fun. It was like the sales floor was pretty crazy, good atmosphere. Like everyone was working towards the same goal. So I enjoyed it. Yeah, it was good. It was an eye-opening experience, put it that way.
I think what's interesting is like, over on the US side of the house, like the split desk has been like the norm for, I would say, almost like decades. And maybe that's one of the reasons why so many great like UK recruiters are just coming out, just absolutely crushing it. When many times like a sales or account manager was like a growth opportunity. Everybody just started as a recruiter and never really got the sales training. Just random thoughts I have in the middle of a podcast. Okay. So like, why'd you end up, you had a boss there. What spurred you at looking at something different?
So towards the end of my time in agency, I was working in like a client management capacity. So I was part of the client services team, was looking after accounts. And I've always said that when you work as an account manager or when you work in internal recruitment, you kind of see the bigger picture as to how an internal organization operates. So whether it's, headcount planning, workforce planning, all that sort of stuff. And I sort of got a feel for it. And then I think I got to a point where it was during COVID. To be honest, I just got a bit sick of agency work. I think it did a long time. I think everybody kind of reevaluated things during COVID. It was such a weird time. You're working fully remotely, etc. And it just got to a point where I think I just needed a change. And I'd been approached by quite a few companies to come and work internally. And you probably know yourself from back then, like salaries were pretty crazy in internal talent acquisition. Yeah. So we're talking like 2021, where companies were chucking a lot of money at experienced recruiters to come internally. So yeah, I took the plunge, joined an IT consultancy, and did a couple of years internal after that. Yeah, I think for me, it was just a needed change.
Out of curiosity, so like at least looking back at my agency days, and I was pretty good up the charts in the company for a big company. But like I made so much more as an internal recruiter.
Yeah, I mean, there's a common misconception. Yeah, I mean, you'll see this all the time on LinkedIn, right? That if you're a talent acquisition professional, it means you're a failed agency recruiter. That's not the case. I was a consistent biller in agency. I definitely wasn't, what I would call a failed agency recruiter. But to be honest, it was just a case of, I've always wanted to experience both sides. So you've kind of got the agency side as a supplier, but also the internal side. And, I think for me, it was just a case of, it wasn't because I couldn't hack it in agency. I was just genuinely really bored. And, I'm somebody who, like, if I get bored, I will make a spur of the moment decision to make a change. I just don't see the point in staying in a role if you feel a bit unfulfilled, a bit bored. So yeah, I think for me, it was more just a case of I needed a new challenge, something to sort of really motivate me, drive me. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I mean, internal recruitment gets a bad rap in the agency world, but actually, I'll hand on heart, I learned more about business development working internally in terms of stakeholder management, managing processes, understanding how to actually influence, senior people in a business. I learned more about that internally than I did during the agency, tenure. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, like I'll be honest, I had a boss internally. Like you could put together some teams that you couldn't quite do on the agency side of the house.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, obviously at the time, look, salaries were pretty awesome. Yes, I'm not going to lie, it was again financially driven. That was element to it. But I think when you work internally, having that guaranteed salary every month, when you've been in agency for 7 years, is quite nice. At the time I was moving house, so it worked out pretty well. But yeah, I think for me it was just a case of getting that sort of 360 experience of working agency and internally. It helped set me up for launching my own business.
Well, fast forward, I know we spoke about this offline, but the tech market went absolutely crazy.
Yeah,
and then the tech market kind of just went uncrazy, pretty almost as fast.
It did. So I got laid off 3 times in the space of 9 months from talent acquisition roles, which was essentially the reason why I launched my own consulting business. And yeah, it was mad because I'd been in one company for 7 years, agency, right? So I was very stable. I hadn't really experienced the whole redundancy thing. And, the first time I got laid off, I was working for a massive SaaS company, really kind of high growth business. It was an awesome experience, loved it. And it was a massive shock. Yeah, it was pretty devastating. And to be honest, it took me a couple of months just to sort of get my head around it. And then for it to happen again twice in the next sort of 5 months was nuts. I mean, the third time I literally started laughing during the meeting because I just thought, this can't be serious. At that point, I just thought, I need to do something different here, which is essentially why I launched my own business.
Okay, before you launched, you were putting in the work to try to find another job.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, so the last role that I got laid off from, it was a fixed term contract. So I'd actually been applying for roles before the third role because essentially, I wanted to cover my own back. I think I applied to about 450 roles. So I had an Excel spreadsheet which tracked every single application. I still have that spreadsheet now, tracked every single application. It was pretty crazy. It was quite eye-opening because I only heard back from a tiny number of applications. And, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of just silence. And I still get rejection emails now from roles I applied for 2-3 years ago. So it's nuts. And I think that experience opened my eyes to the sort of state of the market. Because I think, sometimes when you're employed, I do think you're kind of insulated from that. You focus on your role, you come in every day, you work, whatever. And obviously you're aware of it because, you notice an influx of applicants for roles, or you notice a lot of candidates have gotten open to work, green banner, but that's a separate debate. But yeah, sort of being involved in that and actually being, someone who was applying for jobs, looking for a new role, it just opened your eyes to wow, the market is, what's happening here, because it was insane.
Oh, and okay, so I know a lot of people that once they hit the 450 applications, they crumble a little bit, but then go and do another 450.
Yeah.
At what point in time were you like, I got to do something fucking different?
Honestly, so, I mean, the whole business thing, I've always wanted to run my own business, right? It's been an ambition of mine for sort of 5-6 years. I've got sort of friends who run businesses, like entrepreneurs, and I've always liked the freedom and the creative control that they seem to have. That the fact that they were able to sort of shape their own future and, kind of create something that was theirs, basically, yeah. And I think for me, it was a case of, I'd been looking at it after the second layoff. I, started thinking to myself, do I really want to go through this again and get laid off for a third time, which ended up happening. And to be honest with you, I just thought, I don't want to be in a position where I have no control over what's happening, because I just felt completely out of control. You log into to your laptop for the morning and to get told, right, you've lost your job, sorry, see you later, for the third time again. You kind of don't have that control. You just feel like you're just drifting around. And I think for me, I just thought, screw it. I had some cash from, severance packages. And I just thought, it is screw this. I back myself. I'm just going to do it. And then, nowadays, you don't need an office. You don't need a team to launch a business. You need a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection. which I had. So I just did it. It was earlier than I had planned originally. I think the plan originally was to sort of, work in TA for a few more years. But yeah, I just kind of thought, take the plunge and go for it.
Okay. And so you decided to take the plunge. You made the decision, a point where many people talk about doing it. Now, here's the fun part. You made the decision. Now you actually have to go execute. What the hell did you do day one? Like, okay, I am now doing this. Day one, you sat down at your desk and you're like, what do I do? What did you do?
Yeah, so I think for me, I'm somebody who plans. I'm somebody who typically likes to have a plan. Now, in this situation, because it was a bit of a spur of the moment thing, my plan was kind of executed a lot faster than I would normally expect to be executed. So I think really initially it was a case of, developing a solid go-to-market strategy. How am I going to create a value proposition that actually appeals to customers? Do I want to be another agency, or do I want to do something a little bit different? Yeah, how can I, create a solution, create a service that actually appeals to a certain client? So whilst I was doing that, obviously I did what everyone does. I tapped up my network, I tried to give myself some breathing space to sort of come up with an idea and try to get some business. I did get some business quite quickly from, sort of old clients, from contacts. I've got a pretty big LinkedIn network, to be fair. So I'm pretty lucky in that sense. And yeah, it was just a case of really, getting crystal clear quite early on, what is my value proposition and how can I actually service clients in a way that wins me business? And that was kind of where the whole fractional talent thing came about.
Did you think about like direct placement? Did you think about contingent and staffing? Or do you just like, this is where I'm going to go?
So yes and no, to be honest. The contingent thing, so I want to sort of make it clear, I'm not anti-contingent. And I think that I've posted on LinkedIn before about the fractional model. I've had contingent recruiters message me saying, why do you not work contingent, and almost be offended by the fact that I've talked about something different. So I do see a place for contingent recruitment. I don't think that contingent is dead. I've seen a lot of, content on LinkedIn about that. I don't believe that at all. But I just think that when I worked internally, I was getting pitched on a weekly basis by contingent agencies. And they all said the same thing. Yeah, we've got a big database. We're the global leaders in blah, blah, blah. We're market specialists. Everybody's a market specialist. I've heard it all before. And I thought to myself, I don't want to be one of those agencies saying that. So for me, it was just a case of I'm going to come up with something a little bit different. And I didn't really consider contingent at all. It was just, I want to do something where I can forecast revenue. The fractional model is more of a retained style model. It's, safer for me as a solo business owner because it means that I've actually got potential to know what I'm going to earn, which is good. I think having a contingent business is fine, but obviously you ultimately don't know what you're going to earn because you can't guarantee pipeline, because pipeline in recruitment, as you know, can look amazing on a Monday, but on a Tuesday it looks like an atomic bomber's gone off in your inbox. You're always chasing your tail. So for me, like, I stuck to it and just said, I'm going to focus on this fractional thing, this sort of embedded thing. And if I diversify and look at contingent as well, it kind of dilutes the message that the fractional model has. So I just thought I'm going to commit to this and see where it takes me.
So, okay, you jumped in and like, this is what I'm going to do, which is awesome. Phenomenal. So you made the decision, you started executing, you started branding, you started picking up some clients through like your network. When did you really start like, I'm going to actually build this 100% as a fractional business? Or was it early on?
It was pretty early on. I made a decision quite early on to focus on early stage startups. So, founders of startups who didn't have an internal talent team, who were probably, recently funded. They had some cash they wanted to hire, but they didn't necessarily have the internal tools to do that. And from talking to those founders quite early on, I realized that a lot of them didn't really want to spend loads of money on contingent agency fees. Yeah, if you think about like, let's say you're working at 20% and you're working with a startup, they're probably hiring founding engineers on like 6-figure salaries. Those fees are going to start adding up pretty quickly, right? You're talking, big fees, a lot of outlay in recruitment costs. So for me, it was quite clear early on that actually these founders were happy to use an external service provider, but they just didn't want to spend 100K on hiring fees. And that was kind of where I thought, right, how can I fill a gap here? And that was essentially where the whole fractional thing came along, because it was offering them a subscription style model, which is more kind of, pay as you go, plug and play. You're getting an internal talent partner essentially on an interim basis without spending a fortune on huge hiring fees. And that was kind of, it started to work. I started to pitch it. It started to get some traction. And I decided probably about a year ago to really, really just commit to that 100% and just do that essentially. And that was sort of where my whole fractional talent thing was sort of born and embedded. And from there, that's pretty much all I've done since.
So, a lot of people use the word fractional.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that a lot of people don't understand. Like, what are some of the misconceptions when people think about fractional recruiting?
So I think that the main one is that you're a day rate contractor. So I often get asked by people, are you just basically using a fancy phrase for contractor? And whilst, don't get me wrong, you can offer a day rate style pricing within your service. Ultimately, a fractional recruiter, in my view, is somebody who is offering a service to a client for a fraction of the cost, and you're getting the expertise of a full-time employee, on an interim basis. So it's not necessarily a contractor per se. You're basically offering like a retained service, or in my case, like a subscription style service. And that service can be priced either by time, or usually in most cases, in my case anyway, via scope. So you agree a scope of a project, and then you price that project based on, your market knowledge or whatever, and then you execute that project. So I think for me, the biggest misconception is that you're just purely a contractor. And the other one is that you're a part-time employee, basically, which again isn't the case, because actually if you work fractional, you're charging a pretty decent retainer. Yeah, it's a lot more expensive than you would pay someone full-time. But the difference is you're getting them for a shorter period of time. So you haven't got that long-term salary on the books. If, for example, in 6 months' time, like you've seen with a lot of tech companies, suddenly hiring stops and you've got this internal recruiter or this head of talent on a full-time huge salary with benefits, you pay for their equipment, you pay for their training, their onboarding, and you can't get shot of them.
So if somebody's looking at like becoming fractional, like what are some of the first things that you would recommend them to do to get set up?
Yeah, so I think the number one thing really, and this sort of ties into my other business, which is my coaching business. So I actually run a coaching program called the Solo Recruiter Launchpad, which basically helps solo recruiters essentially set up a go-to-market strategy. Most of the recruiters I've worked with have set up fractional businesses. And the first thing is having a solid go-to-market strategy. So understanding, what is your value proposition? How can you offer a fractional service? What are you actually going to offer? And the second thing is defining an ideal client. So who are you going to help? Now, I think typically with fractional, it's usually startups or, companies that don't have an enormous talent team, or, don't have the budget to use agencies, because if you're pitching fractional to say Microsoft or Barclays or Amazon, it's probably not going to land, as much, because they're not really that bothered, about spending X amount of money on a hiring fee. So I think the first thing is having that defined value proposition, having that defined ideal client. And that would apply to any service-based business, because ultimately you are a service provider if you're fractional, right? I think the next thing is just having an understanding that you are going to have to, sell. So it's creating a sales strategy. And a lot of this might sound like quite generic advice, but actually, when you run a fractional business, especially solo, like you are the business is you, right? So if you don't do the work, if you don't put in the time to create a sales strategy, to have a plan around how you're going to acquire clients quite quickly, the rest of it, the branding, the content, that's all irrelevant, because you won't be around long enough to make any of that work. So honestly, I think for me that the first thing is really getting crystal clear on that go-to-market strategy, and then creating an actual consistent and scalable sales process you can execute every single day.
You're right about that, because I think the one thing that keeps a lot of like people from actually doing many things is a sales process and a sales system.
Yeah, because I think the biggest issue that I've seen in the fractional space is, most fractional recruiters, the ones I've come across anyway, tend to be ex-TA, right? So they've been laid off, from a talent acquisition role or a people role, for example, and they decide, I'm going to set up my own consulting business. And they basically approach it with the mindset of, essentially, look, I've got a massive network, and the second that I stick a post on LinkedIn saying I've launched my own business, the floodgates are going to open, and loads of my contacts are just going to send me loads of business into my inbox, and I'll just be sat there turning away business because I'm going to be so busy. In reality, that rarely happens, because the second you launch your own business, you go from being Liam, my ex-colleague, to Liam, the commercial entity. So everybody assumes that when you message them, you're trying to sell them something. And that happens. I noticed that when I launched my business, suddenly when I was sending DMs to people, my response rates dropped dramatically, because they were like, well, he set up a business, he's going to try and pitch me, I'm going to pull back a bit. So I think that, as I said before, having that understanding quite early on, and, I say this to anybody who wants to go fractional, you have to make peace with the fact this is going to be a sales role initially. And if you can make peace with that, then you should do it.
Okay, so you built a sales strategy, you figured out you're going fractional.
Yeah.
How do you actually get those first like one or two clients?
So I think a lot of it is just, again, it's getting crystal clear around who your target market is, then finding out what their problems are. So I always say to people, in my case, for example, I decided quite early that I wanted to work with startup founders. So founders of like seed, Series A, maybe Series B startups. And I identified that when they're looking to hire, they've got three options. They've got option one, do it themselves. But the problem with that is, founder-led hiring, it can take up to 20, 30 hours a week of their time, which is time not spent selling, marketing, whatever. Option two is hire a full-time recruiter, which sounds awesome on paper, but at the end of the day, hiring, it's not linear. Hiring goes up and down. So when you're not hiring, you're still paying that recruiter a salary. What are they going to do? It's a non-revenue generating role. I think when you're in a startup, you want to be hiring people really who can contribute to revenue, whether that's sales or building the product. And option three is using an agency, which is great again, but it's a short-term fix. You're going to be spending some serious money, especially if you're recruiting like the founding roles, whether it's a head of sales, VP of sales, or a CRO, or a head of product, or whatever. So the idea is for me was I wrote those three things down and said, right, I need to come up with a solution that solves those three problems, and then basically pitch that to as many founders as possible. And because my value proposition essentially solves those three problems, I found that I was having warmer conversations with clients because, rather than just saying what every other recruiter says, which is I'm a specialist, I've got loads of candidates, look at me, I'm amazing. I was actually saying, I know that you're struggling with one of these three problems. Here's a solution to those three problems. Do you fancy grabbing a virtual coffee? And that made a massive difference. So I think to answer your question, it's about really getting crystal clear with the specific person or people you're trying to help, and then coming up with a solution to their specific problems.
So, I'm putting on my like TA hat real quick.
Yeah.
Many times you're in your TA recruiter, like your tools are given to you. I think 1 year at one company, I think my total tool spend that they just gave me was something like $35,000.
Yeah.
Worth of tools.
Yeah.
You're coming in to be a fractional recruiter. Are you coming in with your own tools, or are you asking them to pay for or provide tools?
So I actually offer two options. So I offer two different prices depending on whether I have to provide my own tools. So if they have existing LinkedIn recruiter licenses, for example, and they're happy to give me one, for the period of time I'm with the company, then, that will impact the cost of the retainer. If I have to provide my own software, my own tools to source, for example, then again, that will increase the cost of my price. But I think, ultimately tool spend is crazy. I worked for a company and we used to have 20,000 unused emails, 25,000 unused emails just sat around. People weren't sending emails. They were just sat waiting for inbound applications. And that company was spending an absolute fortune on LinkedIn Recruiter. So I think the tool thing, I always say to fractional recruiters, like, you don't need to jump straight into LinkedIn Recruiter if you want to launch your own business. Like, there are other tools you can use. I mean, even if you want to, even Sales Navigator, you get 50 emails versus, I think, 30 for LinkedIn Recruiter Lite. And it's cheaper as well. So there's loads of software out there now, which I think I do think will impact LinkedIn Recruiter in the longer term. Just that's a separate conversation. But yeah, no, definitely. I think, for me, it's a case of I offer the two options and they just pick the one they want to go for. And I think, again, that's just giving them choice, which is always better.
If you want a good laugh, this was many, many years ago at a large defense contractor firm I was working for as internal. The TA lead left to go to another job. The new TA lead walked into a $900,000 unpaid LinkedIn bill.
Wow. Honestly, that I've heard some horror stories like that. Do surprise me because, LinkedIn Recruiter is so expensive. And if you've got a large TA team, it can add up. And I think what I've always found quite crazy working in sort of larger TA teams is that actually, because you're given LinkedIn Recruiter, it's not, you don't have to pay for it. Obviously, it's just given to you. Most of them still just rely on inbound applications. I've been part of huge TA teams where they just sort of sit back and wait for applications and they just sat not using LinkedIn Recruiter. And the cost, I sit back and just think the cost must be insane on a monthly basis for those emails.
Well, that kind of goes into the next question I have for you. Like, typically when you think of a recruiter, it's just like, my job is to come in and fill jobs.
Yeah.
No. As a fractional, are you doing like additional things, or is it just 100% focus on just the filling the positions?
It completely depends. So the way that I price my fractional recruitment offering and the way that I advise others do it is to almost have like a pricing menu similar to like a SaaS product. So if you think about, let's say, DocuSign is a product, right? You've typically got three options. You've got the basic starter version. You've got the kind of pro version, which is normally more expensive with more features. And you've got the enterprise version, which is the most expensive with the most features. So what I typically offer clients is 3 or 4 different options. You've got your basic sourcing service. You've got more of a strategic offering whereby, there'll be stuff like workforce planning, advert creation, job description creation, talent pool building, that sort of thing, diversity and inclusion consulting. Then you've got the most expensive version, which is basically an interim head of talent, where I'm actually heading up the talent function. It could be an early stage startup who don't have any internal process whatsoever, and I'm basically coming in as a fractional head of talent, which I've done a couple of times. And I think again it ties back into what I said before. It's about offering variety. Yeah, I think that the main benefit of being a solo recruiter, in my opinion, of launching your own business is you control what you offer. Yeah, you don't need to offer the one size fits all approach that every agency offers. You can offer different options, and each option includes different additional features. And you're almost using that sort of SaaS model. Rather than a company choosing from 3 different suppliers, they're choosing from your 3 different options. And I just think that's a much better way to do it. So yeah, I think it depends on the client again. So if you're working with a company who already have an internal talent team and you're coming in as like a fractional talent partner to help alleviate a period of hiring volume, then of course your role is just mainly sourcing and filling jobs. But if you're working with an early stage startup who have nothing internally whatsoever, then that's different. You're basically offering them a talent function in a box.
Has anybody actually been like, hey, I want you to shut down your business because I want you for us?
Yeah, 3 times. I've actually been offered a VP of talent role by a Series A startup, and I got offered like a head of talent role from an ex-contact of mine who is the CTO of the company, and another sort of talent partner role. And look, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think, there's always like a 0.1% part of you, which is I think anybody who runs a business, and especially a solo business, and says they're never ever tempted to go back into permanent employment, I think they're probably being disingenuous, because at the end of the day, like, there comes a time sometimes where you just think, there is like, I wouldn't mind that security because, if you're having a bad week. But I think it's quite common because you're going in there as a fractional supplier. And this is actually why I advise a lot of people, talent partners who are out of work currently, who they've been on the market for 6-9 months, just give it a try, because if you go into a company on a fractional basis, make a real impact, they're going to want to keep you. And I've been offered some pretty big salaries to join permanently. Now, I haven't taken them because I actually quite enjoy the chaos of running business. But yeah, it's a good way into a company because you're proving yourself. It's the world's best interview, yeah? You go into a company as a fractional consultant, over deliver on what you've promised them. I mean, that is better than any interview process, in my opinion. So yeah, I've been offered a few jobs off the back of it, and I imagine that will probably continue.
Do you think there would ever be like a salary equity package that would be like, this company's going to exit? This could be like a $10 million package.
You never know. Listen, my inbox is open. No, I think, honestly, like I said before, look, when you run a business, yeah, I'm under no illusions that it's hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, right? It really is. And I think I do want to make that sort of clear to anybody who is looking to go fractional. It's not easy. You are essentially in control of your revenue. I am the head of finance, the head of marketing, the head of social media content, the head of delivery, the head of sales. Yeah, I wear a lot of hats. Yeah, my head is hurting from the weight of the amount of hats that I wear. So, genuinely, of course, yeah, I'm sure if Amazon said to me, we'll give you, $10 million to be our head of talent, I'd probably say yeah.
Fair. The Elite Recruiter Podcast has multiple summits coming up that you need to make sure that you are registered for. We have the AI Recruiting Summit 2025 coming up. And on top of that, finish the year strong. These 2 summits are going to help you move the needle, help you achieve your goals, help you achieve your dreams, and make 2025 the year that you started out and you wanted it to be. Make sure you get registered, and also stay tuned. We got something cooking for you guys. Working on another project that you guys are going to absolutely love. All right. See you guys at the summits, and see you guys soon. So it's one of those things. I think you've also, we talked about this offline, like you've really also leaned heavily on tech. and
Yeah.
tech has really helped you out, and AI has helped you out. Can you like start talking about that on the back end? Like, how are you a super recruiter with the tech that you have?
Yeah. So for me, again, this sort of ties into why I think the fractional thing is a successful model, right? So technology's leveled the playing field, in my opinion. And I think we're almost in, like, without coming across as, cliche, in a new sort of phase of recruitment, a new sort of era, which is like the AI era, right? AI is not going anywhere. Yeah, it really isn't. And AI and automation allows you to essentially run, a business as if you've got staff. So I use three platforms really. I use Clay, which is awesome. I'm actually still sort of learning about Clay. It's a complex platform, but it's amazing, right? I use a platform called Growth Machine for multi-channel outreach, which is brilliant. And I use ChatGPT just to sort of, almost like a virtual assistant, to be honest, just because I've got loads of projects in there, sort of structuring ideas and sort of, getting my thoughts together about things. And I think that now is the perfect time to run a business. And I've got a belief that the next few billion-dollar companies will be tiny businesses that just rely on software. Because I just think that now we're in an era where, for me personally, I run campaigns through Clay and Growth Machine, and it's like I've got two SDRs working for me full time. I think that is the ultimate, leveling of the playing field in my view. And I think a lot of the bigger agencies who've traditionally hired based on headcount, so that they've always grown based on how many people they've got, on the phones, they're being outperformed by AI because AI doesn't take a toilet break. AI doesn't go make a coffee and not come back for an hour. AI doesn't take sick days. And that's
Right. And like Clay, like I'm learning Clay too. I feel like I'm going to keep on learning Clay. How long did it take for you to actually like be functional in that system?
It took me a while, to be honest. I mean, so I'm pretty techie or a recruiter, but Clay is the most complex tool that I've used because I've burned through a lot of credits with Clay. You've got to really get used to it. I think I've spent quite a bit of time recently doing a lot of the sort of tutorials online. I mean, to be honest, YouTube is pretty good for it as well. I mean, you don't have to spend a fortune to upskill in Clay. But yeah, I think it took me probably 3 months of sort of, playing around with it before I got to a point where I can actually use it and, use it efficiently. But it's just got so much functionality. I think it's amazing the way that it can, business development, for example, it can just do things that even an SDR would probably struggle to do, to be honest. So, yeah.
I mean, like some of the even basic stuff, like you can pull LinkedIn jobs, data enrich who the hiring managers are within like minutes. And I mean, that was a VA. That was a VA's job, or that was like before the days of VA, like me sitting there for 8 hours.
Oh yeah, I remember downloading an Excel document of exporting a list of jobs and then sitting there for like 6 hours finding people on LinkedIn for those companies, and then the next day emailing them all. And that was like 2 days work and can be done now in like 5 minutes. It's nuts, but again, it goes back to what I said before. I do believe that now if you are a solo recruiter, a solo business owner, and you've got a decent software budget, you can tackle big projects. You can really compete with the big agencies because you can still perform and deliver, in a better way, a more efficient way than they do, in my opinion. So yeah, I think we're in this kind of AI revolution, AI era. It's not going anywhere. I don't think AI will necessarily replace recruiters, but I do think it will massively impact those who don't use AI. That's kind of how I feel about it.
I'm with you on that. Well, we've definitely covered a lot. One last thing before we jump over to the quickfire questions is I've seen you over the past, I think we've been connected for maybe like 2 years now.
Yeah.
I've seen like an evolution of what you've been doing with content, and you've been spending a lot more time on content. Like, can you talk about that and the impact that it's had?
Yeah. So content's a funny one, right? So I'm introverted naturally, right? I'm quite an introvert person. I've always been quite chilled, quite quiet. And I don't actually have like Facebook, Instagram. I don't really have social media. I'm not a big social media guy. However, when I launched my own consulting business, sort of 18 months ago, I had started to experiment with content, and I kind of realized that actually, if I don't market my business, if I don't market myself, nobody else is going to. And I think a lot of recruiters use LinkedIn, for example, to post jobs, to message candidates, but that's all they do. And for me, the benefit of content is you're positioning yourself as a credible authority in your market. So let's say you're a recruiter who I don't know, you're working with like Salesforce partners. If you post content talking about Salesforce all the time and your network is full of Salesforce people, then you're positioning yourself as an authority in their market, their ecosystem, and they're more likely to come to you if they need a new job or if they want to hire. So I just started really pushing it. It took me a while to get used to it because, again, you are stepping out your comfort zone. I do a lot of video-based content, which was awful and nerve-wracking at the start. My first video on LinkedIn, I recorded it 18 times. And it was a 63-second video. And I tell that story to people because it takes a while to get used to your own voice. I would never have done like a podcast 2 years ago, right? It wouldn't have been something I did because I would have hated the thought of it, of clips existing of me on camera talking. But content's been great. I mean, I've got a lot of inbound business from content, and I wholeheartedly recommend anybody who sets up a business, but even if you were employed as an agency recruiter or an internal talent partner, like talk, post content, talk to your network, talk to your audience, like talk about the roles you're recruiting for, talk about your candidates, talk about your clients, talk about your stories. Yeah, don't be afraid to share, because actually, yeah, you get the odd troll who might criticize you or make fun of you, whatever, which I don't really care now, to be honest. But actually, you'll get a lot of positives out of it as well. And people get to know you and know who you are, know what your opinion is. And I think it's really, really important.
Awesome. Well, we've covered a lot, like about how to set yourself up fractionally, what you're supposed to do, how to pitch clients, how to figure out your ICP, like all sorts of stuff, the back end. Is there anything else that you want to share that we did not cover that I forgot to cover?
I think just on the content piece, to be honest, I wanted to just add to that. So in the last maybe 18 months to a year, I've probably had free consultations with over 200 solo recruiters about potentially working with me in a coaching capacity. And the one thing that I've seen, across the board, I'd say probably over 90% of those conversations has been, people being scared of posting. And I do genuinely think that, I guess my message to anybody really is that have the confidence to just take a chance and try it. Give yourself a month, 2 months and see how it goes. Because ultimately, I really believe that content is the best way to differentiate yourself from your market, because it's a way to nurture passive leads. It's a way to build credibility. And, recruiters have loads of awesome stories. So when people say, I don't know what to post, I don't know what to say, like in one day, if you speak to most recruiters, they can tell you 5 or 6 hilarious stories from that day that would blow your mind. Talk about that. Yeah, just talk about it. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared of posting. If a guy like me who's introverted and, is quite dry and quite sarcastic, if I can post content that makes people laugh and that interests people, then I'm sure you can.
I'll tell you, this is like a cheat code, but a way more complex cheat code. Have a podcast, share stories, but I'll just say setting up a podcast is hard.
Oh, honestly, yeah. I've spoken to you about this, but yeah, podcasting is just, I mean, to be honest, I think it's brilliant. It's a great way to, have conversations and market yourself, but I do think it's tough. I mean, I think it is tough to build an audience and to build that credibility, build that trust. Obviously, you've done an amazing job of this. I'm a big fan of this podcast. So,
well, thank you. You're seeing like year 4.
Awesome.
Well, okay. Well, jumping over to the quick fire questions, don't need to be quick answers, but with everything that you've seen from the agency recruiting, the internal, the fractional recruiting, like just the changing environment of artificial intelligence, somebody hits up your calendar, books a time with you. It's just like, hey, I'm looking at becoming a recruiter.
Right.
Like, never been a recruiter before. What advice would you give to me to have a successful recruiting career?
Be consistent with your habits and actions. So I've seen so many awesome recruiters get into the industry. They've, gone hell for leather for the first 2 weeks on the phone, speaking to candidates, speaking to clients, and then they don't get any wins from it. If they get nothing from it, then they just quit. And I've always maintained that the best approach that I've seen work in recruitment is to have consistent daily habits that you repeat without fail. So whether that's posts on LinkedIn, whether that is sending in-mails to candidates, business development emails, making calls, whatever, you need to set yourself daily targets that you can consistently hit. And I think if you do that, I believe you will succeed in recruitment. But I think that for me, that's been the one thing I've noticed in my entire career, agency, internal, whatever. That is the biggest thing that most people don't do. They're just not consistent with the habits. They do things for a few weeks. It's like when everyone joins the gym in January, yeah, and by February they've quit. It's the same thing. You need to be consistent with your daily activity, and recruitment is a numbers game to an extent. Like, you do have to be consistent, and you have to, make calls. You can't just, have a week off business development. You have to do things consistently. And if you do that, I think you've got a good chance of being successful.
Love that. Same question, but for somebody that's been around the block, let's say 2 decades, they hit you up, everything changing. What advice would it be to an old dog?
Embrace technology. Honestly, if you want using technology, embrace it. I actually recently coached somebody who is in recruitment for 25 years and uses an Excel spreadsheet on a phone for their candidates and clients. And I got him into using Clay, and his mind is blown. So honestly, like, embrace technology. People criticize automation, right? They criticize AI. But for me, technology makes things easier to do. It's there to help you do things in a more efficient way, essentially, right? And for me, I think if you embrace technology, then you haven't used it before, I just think it will open your eyes to a completely new way of working, which will save you time. I mean, if I didn't use tech, genuinely, I would work 24 hours a day because I wouldn't have any time. I don't know fair play to anyone who's not using tech. but yeah, it's embrace it.
I mean, if it wasn't for tech, I wouldn't have this podcast while still being able to recruit too.
There you go. Case in point.
What's a favorite book that's had a huge impact on your career?
Yeah, so easily Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's quite a cliche answer because I know it gets talked about a lot, but honestly, I've read it about 10, 15 times because I just think it's so applicable to recruitment. Like, it really, really is. Yeah, I remember when I first got into agency recruitment, I was always told, X amount of calls per day, X amount of emails, you have a day plan, tick off different responsibilities every single day and stick to it consistently. And Atomic Habits, it talks about the idea of building habits, or, essentially stopping bad habits and creating good habits. And honestly, that is the best advice, that I've ever read and I would ever give to anybody, especially in recruitment. So yeah, it's a brilliant book. Massively recommend it. Yeah, I've read it numerous times, and yeah, fantastic.
Awesome. Like, in your fractional career, what's one of the biggest failures that you had to work through?
There's been a couple. So I think initially one big failure was when I first started, it was heavily day rate focused. So I also had the misconception when I first went fractional that actually it's essentially contracting. And I'm not against day rate work. I've done some day rate work since, but the problem with day rate work, if that is your sole method of pricing, you're essentially an employee without any benefits, right? Because if you're working Monday, Tuesday with a client, what happens if a bunch of stuff comes in on a Thursday? Do you A, work that extra day, and B, if you do you invoice them for it? So being completely reliant on day rate work, on time-based pricing, is a mistake because every human only has a certain amount of time in the day, right? So you are capped at how you can scale that model. So that's one thing I would definitely say was a mistake. And I think the other mistake that I made was, I think I got really obsessed at the start with having an awesome pitch deck, having an awesome logo, having, X, Y, and Z, all the marketing material, when I should have just been, contacting clients, contacting prospects. I think I took maybe a bit too much time at the start because I'm a perfectionist, right? So I'm really funny. If I'm cooking a meal, like, I have to have all the ingredients lined up on a kitchen counter. Yeah, I've got to have everything there. Everything's always kind of planned out. And I think for me, launching into my solo business, I spent too much time at the beginning obsessing over, the logo, the color scheme, the branding, the content, the marketing materials, when I had no clients. So it's all well and good having an awesome PDF document, but if you haven't got anyone paying you at the end of the month, it's irrelevant. So I think, yeah, they were the two biggest mistakes that I made.
I see that happening a lot with a lot of people. It's just it's the things that you need to take care of with a business, but how did you realize / get over the fact that that wasn't moving the needle and you had to do something different?
I think it was actually a pretty stern conversation with a mentor of mine. So I've got a mentor who has, he's exited 3 businesses. He's in marketing. And, when I first launched the business, I still talk to him now, but he was quite involved in terms of just somewhere I can bounce ideas off, really. And I remember after like a month or two of all this, he was talking about, what have you achieved? What have you done? And I showed him my pitch deck. I showed him my marketing one page. And he just said to me, like, what is all this? Like, how many clients have you got? How many leads have you generated? Like, I don't care about any of this. Like, what are you doing? And it was a bit of a wake-up call, to be honest, because I think, again, it goes back to what I said before. Like, and I see this happen all the time, honestly. Yeah. So I mentioned before I coach solo recruiters. I've seen so many solo recruiters, I'll say to them, what have you done this week? And they've spent the week, coding their database or organizing their database or creating folders in their inbox or creating one pager on Canva, but they've made no sales calls. They've sent no sales emails. They've done no business development whatsoever. And I just think when you are solo, again, you have a limited amount of time. You have to prioritize sales and marketing immediately. And that means reaching out to prospects and trying services.
If you didn't have that mentor that you bounce that off of, where do you think you would be?
I do definitely think it was something I was aware of at the time. And I was aware that actually I need to stop spending so much time doing this, like this kind of, this graphic design basically, because it's actually completely pointless. But I think sometimes hearing it from somebody else is quite good. And it's why I say that I do think if you launch a business, it is good to have mentors. It's good to surround yourself with people who are maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead. So, I coach recruiters who have just launched. I've been going for 18 months, so I've been where they are now. I've got mentors who have been in business for 5, 6, 7 years. In this guy's case, 20 years. They've walked where I am now. They've been there. And I do think that having a mentor can sometimes be quite a good shortcut because you can experience something that somebody else has experienced 100 times. And that first-hand experience through their eyes can sometimes help you get through a situation a lot faster than if you had to do it yourself. So I do think, to answer your question, I would have been able to get through it. I was aware of it. I was, I'm a pretty self-aware guy, but yeah, just hearing it from somebody else, and he's quite a direct talker. So yeah, it was good to hear.
You get a chance to chat with a lot of recruiters. You get a chance to, because of the content, because of the coaching, because of just the interaction that you do online that I see you constantly having. I'm sure you get asked by a lot of recruiters just like questions like, what about this? What about that? Like, how do I get XYZ set up? Is there a question that you wish they would actually ask you? And if so, what is that?
Yeah, so to be honest, I get asked a lot of questions. A lot of the time it ties into superficial stuff like, what software do you use? They might ask about, what website do you use to design your logo? Like, what mobile banking app do you use, etc. And a lot of that stuff is great. And don't get me wrong, like it is important to know if you launch a business. But I think for me, the one question I wish they would ask me, it ties back into confidence. So how do I start posting? How do I get over the self-doubt of launching a business, put myself out there? Because that was my biggest question when I launched my business. It was, how do I just do it? Yeah. How do I just embrace it? How do I just forget about all of the noise and just go for it? And I think that a lot of the time when I'm talking to recruiters who are, on the fence, they might be employed and thinking about going fractional. They might be out of work. I almost feel like sometimes when they're asking me about software, they're asking about, do you use Canva? Do you use Clay? They're almost giving themselves reasons to not just launch. So I think for me, it's just, I wish every single recruiter that I spoke to who wants to go fractional would just say, how do I have the confidence or develop the confidence to just do it and just go for it? If you have that mindset, if you're sort of at that stage, I think you will actually launch and you will actually go for it. And I think if you want, then it's probably not the best idea.
Got to get going. I love that.
Yeah.
Do you want a good laugh about like logo stuff? I hate logos with a passion. It requires like art, and I don't have an art brain. My Elite Recruiter podcast logo, when I started the podcast, I typed into Canva podcast art, and it was like the second option. It's been that since.
Yeah. So my logo, my logo was again similar. So my fractional business is called Your Remote Tech Recruiter, and it was basically just different graphics of a capital Y. And I just saw this cool one that looked interesting, and then just kind of decided I'm going to, write the word Your Remote Tech Recruiter next to it, or the words. And that was like the second design that I created, and I've just sort of stuck with it. Because again, when I first launched, I considered like using a company who were going to charge like £1,000 to create a logo in a website and everything. My website was actually created on Squarespace initially. because
Mine still is.
yeah, I mean, I think I've upgraded to like to another sort of similar thing, but like it was like £17 a month to host it. It doesn't matter. I think people, again, it goes back to what I said before. People obsess over stuff like websites, logos. It doesn't really matter. Like no one really cares. It's actually about the service you offer. Do you have a service that people want to spend money on? If you don't, how your website being a £10,000 creation for a digital agency doesn't really matter.
Now there's some AI stuff that can click, boom, website.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Exactly. AI is there anyway. So if in doubt, use AI.
Awesome. Well, for people that want to follow you, Liam, how do they go about doing that?
LinkedIn. So my surname Haghighat is pretty recognizable. So it's pretty easy to find. I'm just Liam Haghighat on LinkedIn. Search for me on there. And yeah, drop me a follow. I'm always posting content, probably too much content to be fair. But yeah, drop me a follow and send me a DM.
Awesome. And before I let you go, is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I actually want to share one thing just around, we talked about technology before. And I think for me, my biggest advice to anybody, and I say this all the time, to be honest, on LinkedIn anyway, but my biggest advice to anybody who wants to launch a solo business, a fractional business, is be very careful how much you spend on software at the start, because, it's very easy to, go from nothing to like £2,000 a month on software, $2,000 a month, right? And I think that there's a lot of software out there which, it does the job that like a Zoom Info or a Source Whale does, but for 80% less. So just be very mindful that you will be pitched when you become a founder on LinkedIn of any company. You will start getting pitched at by SDRs of software companies. And I made the mistake. I think when I first launched, I had about 100 demos of different software because I was curious, and I nearly spent a fortune. So just be careful about how much you spend on software, because it can quite quickly spiral out of control.
Yeah, so true. Well, Liam, I just want to say thank you. Like, it's one of those things that I hate to say this. I wish I had this conversation a year ago. I've been actually looking forward to chatting with you, just because I think this is an opportunity for so many people. Create a baseline revenue. If you're in between jobs, like, this is the way to kind of like attack the job market and just be absolutely different and not just hitting the apply. I think in the US there's something like 160,000 recruiters still looking for work that are open to work.
Crazy.
You got to be different. In today's AI world, you have to find a way to differentiate yourself, and maybe going fractional could be the thing for you. But Liam, I just want to say thank you, man. I've enjoyed your content. I've enjoyed being connected with you, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. So for the recruiters out there, go out there, put in the work, go out there, get the confidence to sell, get the confidence to go out there to reach out to your next client, your next customer, and go make 2025 the year that you crush your dreams. Make it happen.
Love it. Thank you.